Figure out I learned how to do this early. We are live on air. Let's get it started. Welcome into Inside Carolina Live podcast the day after. It's 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Jason made a great point. It's the same time, but an hour later on the same day when we thought we were supposed to be here. This told Buck before we got going here, Jason, that I got up on time because my phone updated correctly. And then I was downstairs getting my coffee, and I looked at my oven, and it said 7:58, and I panicked, and I started to run up here and jump online right away. So it's been that kind of morning already. Carolina wins 31-28 in Virginia. The curse is over, all that good stuff. Buck, I'll come to you to start with. The way I look at these games at this point, it's a win. A win is a win is a win. What you got?
Oh, you're right. Completely right. 8-1. I mean, we get to the end of the show and you ask me how I feel about it. I'm going to say 8-1. And it could have actually been 38-28 pretty easily. Um, what was Virginia doing there at the end of the ball game? Come on. I mean,
Man, that was garbage.
it's like basketball games where teams down by 20 points and they're fouling at the end of the game trying to get what are we doing here? Yeah, that was garbage. Anyway, 8-1. They Mac checked a bunch of boxes. I think there were some positives out of this game aside from the getting the dub. We can get into those as we go. I think the thing probably that warmed my heart more than anything else was to see Storm Duck come on and start playing as he's capable of playing. That's big. That's huge for North Carolina if he can keep that up.
2 games in a row now.
So that and Drake May again is Drake May doing Drake May things. Elijah Green getting all the carries was. I complained about it earlier this year when I said, man, they need to narrow down this running back room a little bit. Well, they narrowed it down yesterday for sure. Nobody got a carry but him. And he looked fairly decent doing it. Those things, Josh Downs, what are you going to say? Superman wears Josh Downs pajamas at this point. So those are the kinds of things that I look at. The defense, we would love to see the defense play better, but honestly, Virginia, their offense was about the same as it was against any other conference team they played this year. They scored more points, but yards per play was the same basically. So move on, get ready to go to Wake Forest and see what happens there.
Yeah, certainly some interesting ball games across the country and in the ACC that we can talk about when we get deeper in the show. But Jason, your overall takeaway here, like Buck said, Josh Downs. I said Drake was ridiculous last week, and he remains ridiculous. But Josh Downs, good gracious, man.
Josh Downs really needs to play Virginia more often. Last couple of years, he's had a field day with those guys, and it's interesting because this year Virginia's secondary has been really good, and their defense in general has not given up big plays and has just been really solid. And we saw that for most of the game, but they could not. They just did not have anybody who could handle him, and the guy lived open, and not a ton of yards after the catch. Virginia. I'm really impressed by how well Virginia tackles on the back end. They tackle and they run to the football and they take great angles and all of that. That, man, that shows you what you want to do on the back end. But they just couldn't cover him, and he was wide open most of the day. And you could see him letting whoever was trying to cover him know after each play. You could see, you can't cover me, you can't hold me. Told you what I was going to do. These sorts of things. He definitely enjoys playing against Virginia. I did think, by the way, yesterday was interesting because as you said, games around the country. The Alabama LSU game, first half, it looked like they were trying to take us back to 2011. And then this game, first half, looked like they were trying to take us back to 1996. So a lot of nostalgia, a lot of history in college football yesterday. But after knocking the cobwebs off a little bit in that first half, the other thing that you really have to like about this win, and this is something that I took away from it, is Carolina took a punch yesterday. Virginia came out and they punched him. And there were some things that didn't go right in the first half. And Carolina was yesterday not just a fighter that had a big punch that could, knock you out. There's not just first round Mike Tyson, but they took a punch and then just kind of smiled and was like, oh, okay. So it's going to be that. All right, it's going to be that kind of day. And then they resettled and said, all right, well, we're not getting big plays. We're going to have to really just execute our way down the field. And then they flipped the switch and they did it and they outboxed them. And that, I think, is a really good sign for where Carolina is just as a developing team to be able to win more than one kind of game. And I think that's a big thing moving forward, that they now have the confidence they can win that kind of game.
I agree with that. And this is the Day After podcast sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com here at Inside Carolina. I guess I should mention that. Shout out to the couple hundred folks that are in here on a Sunday morning live. If you're not here live, you're catching this later in the day. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Buck, let's talk about this Josh Downs phenomenon here, and I want to sort of couch it with Jason's point there. He caught 15 of 16 targets. He was open. Drake May, of course, gets them the ball. But Virginia did a good job on virtually everybody else. I mean, Drake May still dished it around to 7 other guys, not named Josh Downs. So Drake did his job, but it proves the adage, and it brings me back, and it's relevant next week, to Michael Campanaro. You remember that, don't you, Buck? That discussion when
one guy can't beat you.
I said one guy will not beat North Carolina.
That's going to be written on your tombstone, Buck.
12-0, and all that, and Michael Campanaro. A lot of great predictions we've had here. But Josh Downs was that one guy yesterday. I tweeted about it. I think they're the best pass catch duo in the country. I don't know who's better at it, but Downs. He's a little guy, but he plays as big as you can be on the field, just perspective-wise. Let's talk about that just briefly. Perspective-wise, he's as good as anybody I've seen at Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you could toss out some names like Hakeem Nicks, who'd probably be the guy you would talk about. Dwight Jones had a great college career. What happened to him after that, who knows? But the Downs, he's fast. That helps. Right. But more than that, he has such great change of direction in the short field. I mean, he can just change on a dime, and it's very tough because in that short field, if they've got him a man-to-man on him, he's going to leave that guy at some point. You just got to watch for when it's going to be. He's going to get away from that guy. If it's zone, he's just going to sit down. He's going to get into zone, sit down, and he's going to be open again. So he virtually has the opportunity to get open because of his quickness and ability to change directions that most receivers do not have. That kind of body control is just special. And so you can put up all kinds of names if you want to for North Carolina in terms of receivers, but Downs is that guy. He's a career generational talent at wideout, and North Carolina's going to have to replace that guy next year. I'm not looking forward to it because that's a heck of a security blanket, knowing you got one guy that's going to get open.
Yeah. Jason, he's got the physical ability. But it's the added layer of he just knows how to play the game, right? He knows how to do things that guys with equal physical talent can't do. And like somebody posted, Ray Ram in the chat, he catches everything that's around him.
Yes, a lot of what you see with him is, and by the way, Buck, it's not just the change of direction; it's the change of speed. That's the other thing that makes him so difficult to defend. And getting to what you're talking about, Tommy, it's the ability, not just the ability, but the feel for how to change speed, how to set a guy up, and then all of a sudden burst at the right moment to create space. That shows that he's not just going out there and running the steps on the route, right? He's going out there and he understands how to set a guy up in the confines of the route. And so, the best way to think about him in that respect is you think about these, the best one-on-one point guards who can handle the ball, like, and you get them with a defender and they just know how to set that guy up, and he's going this way and you think he's going full speed, and then all of a sudden stop, and then he's going full speed, and all of a sudden he's by a guy, and the crossover dribble type players. You think of an Allen Iverson or a Kyrie Irving or that kind of ball handler to be able to put guys in a blender based on change of speed, understanding of, I'm going to get you moving this way, and then I'm going to burst. It's that stuff that that sets him apart, and it's the feel for how to do it. And then, as you talked about it, he also, you can see he takes great joy in the process of, again, he's like one of those and one type guys who really takes joy in the process of not just beating a guy, but humiliating him one-on-one and saying, you can't guard me, you can't cover me. And, to me, the comps for him, and I do think he probably is the best receiver in Carolina history. The comps for me are people like a Julian Edelman, a guy, those guys who you watch in the NFL and they have 10-year careers in the slot, and they just give NFL defenses absolute fits because you give them a two-way go, you give them an option route or something, and the combination of feel and intelligence and burst, I mean, that guy's just never covered. So, you look at an Edelman, you look at actually a Hunter Renfrow type guy. I mean, Hunter Renfrow was a pain in the butt for everybody who covered him when he was at Clemson. And he was that security blanket for Deshaun Watson and those guys. And then you look at Hunter Renfrow, you just look at him, and it's hilarious. Actually, you can go and Google this. You can go and search this. You see a picture of Clemson's wide receiver group out at like a pool, or it was like a lake day or something. And it's like him with a bunch of guys that look like NFL players. And then it's Hunter Renfrow, who looks like he's like the PE teacher from the middle school down the road. And if you look at that list of receivers, who's had the best NFL career of those guys? It might be Hunter Renfrow. So I think T. Higgins might have been on that. I'm trying to remember who else was in there, but he's had a really good NFL career because it's not just about the traits. And the thing is, he had that acceleration, that quickness, but it's the feel for that. And then Josh Downs has that, plus another gear that a Renfrow just never had and never could have. So, and that's the thing that and actually I see Money Mark in the chat makes another good comp, very similar to an Antonio Brown, right? Brown a little bit more muscled up, but similar kind of stature. And what made Brown so hard to cover was just how slippery, how good a feel he had, and then just the acceleration and the speed changes. And that's what Josh Downs brings to the table. And it's really fun to watch.
It is. And then you've got a quarterback that can put it on him wherever he is, given all the speed changes, all the twitchy movement and all that stuff. And Drake May still hits him in stride left and right. Buck, let's go ahead and get this portion of the show out of the way early. And we can talk about this. Was it Drake's worst game? Was that the freshman game against Virginia? Or was it earlier in the season? And that being said, you still, I think, what was it, 5 straight 300-yard games? So he falls 7 yards short on that. But 26 of 37, 293, and a couple touchdowns. I mean, come on, man. You know, Mac Brown, if this season wraps up like we think it possibly could, I'm not convinced yet, but Mac Brown needs to be the one building Drake May statue out front of the arena. I mean, it's just amazing what this kid's been able to do.
Yeah, it really is, Tommy. And you know, I think maybe one of my favorite plays of his this entire year is when he reversed field on Virginia for that touchdown. And you could tell just as soon as he changed direction and was starting to go the other way, he's going to score. You knew immediately he was going to get by those guys and have a touchdown. He's another guy we talked about Downs in a different way, a different position. Just has such tremendous instincts for the game. It's hard to describe. You can only. It's like Supreme Court Justice said about porn. You know it when you see it.
Potter Stewart.
And so, and he's got it. I mean, he has just got that feel for the game, the instinct for the game, the ability to zig when you zag. He has those things, and it's just amazing to watch. And I just encourage everybody to savor every minute of it that they can, because he's special, special guy. And to have the duo of May and Downs together on the field at the same time is just unreal to watch.
Jason, looking at the game, I thought Virginia did some things, hit him a little bit. I think on one of those early run plays, he took a shot in his head. He was pointing at his noggin that I think was really not talked about at all, and maybe it was just my imagination. But Virginia has good corners. Virginia has a good defense, and it didn't ever seem to be a threatening situation to May as far as getting him into terribly much trouble. What'd you see from May from your vantage point, your scouting vantage point? I mean, the numbers would have been a lot bigger without at least 2, maybe 3 drops. What'd you see?
Yeah, one thing I want to highlight before that. Yesterday, Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker, and C.J. Stroud combined for 53% completion percentage, 5.4 yards per attempt, 1 total passing touchdown, and 2 interceptions.
They were all terrible.
So this was not the day to be a Heisman caliber, Heisman candidate quarterback, unless, of course, you're Drake May and you have your off game, and it looks like that. So I want to preface it with that first. Is, you know, he did not have the flashy numbers as much yesterday as he has the rest of the year, but one of the tests, if you're an NFL scout, one of the things you want to see is, how does a quarterback play when it gets muddy? You know, can he be a mudder? Is he capable of you know, having success when some of those big plays aren't available, when you're throwing where guys are more covered, when you've got a little pressure, you know, those sorts of things. So I think Drake May yesterday showed in spades that he can, again, I think he's proven this a couple times this year, but he proved he can handle that. And you think about it, you're right. I mean, the one really uncharacteristic drop by Antoine Green changed the game. I mean, that guy has been really consistent catching the football. And he had to stretch just a little bit for that, but that's one that, you know, he's going to come down with 95 times out of 100, if not more. And, you know, that changes the game pretty significantly. And I think again, what I saw is a guy that recognized, okay, so this is what they're doing. They're playing over the top. They're bringing pressure from a couple different spots. I'm going to notice. I'm going to start keeping. I'm going to start being willing to take the shorter stuff, the not sexy stuff more quickly, and just let my guys do their thing. I think that's been the thing. And that's where, again, you've got a chance in every game when that guy plays, because if you bring pressure and you play over the top and you combine, then this is what Virginia did. They played over the top, tried to prevent the big plays while also getting pressure. He just cut him to ribbons underneath. And it's the precision and the ability to get the ball out quickly. And then when there's nobody there quickly, because there are a number of times the guys were covered right away, he was able to create with his feet and to slide and potentially throw guys open. And then in other cases, as you mentioned, Buck, that when he's in New York at the end of the year, that's going to be one of those plays that's shown early on that highlight package, or it might be the one that ends it. In terms of the highlight package that they show in the ceremony on television. So, I saw a lot of things. I was asked by a more national podcast this last week, if you take eligibility out of this, is Drake May the number one choice in the NFL draft this year? And I said absolutely. I think he would be the number one draft pick in the NFL coming out this year. And we saw another day. That's why.
Yeah, he's definitely if the trajectory continues. Somebody asked, will he stay 3 years? Well, next year is his third year, and we'll be talking about him, I guess, in April of the 2024 NFL draft. What's interesting to me, or however you want to put it, he doesn't seem like he's running hard, but nobody seems to catch him. And on that reverse field, he's just like, I guess it's sort of graceful, like like some sort of gazelle or long-legged animal that he's just jogging. Nobody gets him, and he just sort of eases in, and then he's finally perfected the pop-up slide. No question. I think he said it in the postgame. He dives on that one play down there where he runs out of bounds at the 2-yard line 3 weeks ago. And Longo talked about the mental aspect of the game and how he's improving on that. I think that's an aspect of it. Day after podcast, it's about 8:22. We got to talk about the offense though, and the end of the game. But that was Phil Longo's been excellent all year, and for most of his time at North Carolina. But the end of the game there, I mean, that was as Carolina as it gets up in Virginia, right? Just let's see if we can keep Virginia in this just a little bit longer. And what'd you think about those in-game scenarios, the onside kick issue? It was just like this is so unnecessary.
Well, all that being true, the thing that, and Mac spoke to this in his press conference, that they got to do a better job of communicating to their onside kick team when to score a touchdown and when not to. Because Bryson Nesbitt, he went and scored the touchdown and gave App a chance to get back in the game. And Twan, if he'd have scored there, there's no way Virginia could have caught North Carolina. So in both cases, the decision that they made, and they were, conscious, intentional decisions, were the wrong ones. So whoever's supervising that onside kick team, they're doing a good job of getting the ball. They just need to do a better job of explaining to them what they need to do once they recover. And you have a point, but at the end of the game, as I said earlier, North Carolina could have easily gone up. I mean, Virginia was almost marching them into the end zone there at the end of the game. I mean, we were getting ready to find out what it's like to split infinity, half at a time down there in the end zone. So they could have easily just marched in from there. I have no doubt that they could have handed the ball to Elijah Green 3 times and gotten in the end zone. So, but they weren't trying to play it that way. They were trying to play it like, let's get the win, get the heck out of here. Let's be conservative and cautious. You can do that. I prefer to be a little bit more aggressive than that, and I just hope it doesn't come back to bite them at some point important from here on out. The big thing that saved them, I think, in this game was after a really horrid offensive first half, Virginia outgained them running and throwing the ball just about in the first half. I think they had them 243 yards for Virginia and 195 for North Carolina. And North Carolina in that first half went 2 of 5 on first down plays. But after that, in the third quarter, they went 4 for 4 on third down. I don't know what Longo said to them at halftime or who said what, but they were a different offensive ball team when they came out in the third quarter. So they did enough offensively. You hate to see them. I hate to see them get that conservative at the end of a game. Sure, you want to be cautious, but not overly so. And I think they were overly so in this game.
Yeah, Jason, that's what we're really there. I think the defense got 3 straight stops. Carolina's up 10. They had at least 2 possessions up 10. That is where I was really going there. I will say this: if I was the offensive coordinator at the very end, and Virginia kept doing that stuff, diving on the ball and hitting my quarterback, we're scoring. We're going to stick it in and then wave goodbye when we leave. But talking about during the fourth quarter, Jason, your thoughts on sort of the conservative play calling. This offense, at least at this point, with what they have right now, is not really built to do anything but run. What did you think about the last half of the fourth quarter, I guess, when Carolina had a chance to salt it away, just couldn't do it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree they did get a little bit overprotective there in terms of not putting themselves you hear people say this as a real negative that, you don't ever want to play not to lose. But that's really what they were doing there is they were taking the approach of they're very much playing the numbers. There's a very much paint by the numbers fourth quarter or second half of the fourth quarter where it's, look, as long as we do this, we're giving, we're bleeding clock, we're doing this. And as long as we have the football, we're going to, every second that goes by, we're less and less likely to let them back in it. I will say this. I'm of the view that in a rivalry game, if you're inside the opponent's 5 or 10 yard line in that kind of situation, you run the dang ball and you take the touchdown if you can get it. You always, first of all, I know coaches say they don't know the spread. And I know coaches in general don't and shouldn't care about the spread. But in a rivalry game in this kind of context, you kind of, you have your guy there like, we score here, we cover. Our alumni are going to be that much happier. And you think about it for a second. And you just tell your backs, ball security, everything's there. You maybe even call timeout for that. But I'm of the view that if you can put an extra score on your rival, you do it. So my wiring is a little different on that. But I understand the opportunity to just put the game away and say, look, a win is a win is a win is a win, especially in Charlottesville. And so I get that. I think that there are a couple things that you could most criticize in this. One is the funny thing. I think Mac was right that Antoine Green should have scored on that onside kick because there were still 2 minutes left. It was debatable. I think it was more debatable than the Nesbitt one earlier in the year where he definitely shouldn't have scored. And you can tell they talked about that as a team after that. And then Green did what he was coached to do, but they didn't tell him like, okay, this time, if you get it. So that would have changed things a little bit. But the other thing is, I think that fourth down play where they called the way the call that they had there, the run call to take the ball out of Drake May's hand there in a game where they'd actually done a pretty good job on short yardage against Carolina in the running game. I didn't like the call on 4th and 3. And I think you could probably, if there's one thing that I'm going to critique the most and sort of not after the fact criticize, but criticize in something that I would have done before the fact differently. It's you've had a lot of success on fourth down all year by putting the ball in Drake May's hands and letting Josh Downs do his thing and all of that. And I think that a little bit more aggression there on fourth down probably changes that game.
Yeah, it was interesting. Downs jumped up and down. He wasn't pleased. But, hey, Carolina got out of there with a win, did enough on offense to get a win. It's the day after podcast. It's 8:30 on the East Coast. Shout out to the 400 folks that are in here watching. The faithful, we much appreciate you guys joining us. We're going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. They're sponsors. And of the 400 in here, if y'all are premium subscribers on Inside Carolina, you can all get a lot of money back with that 10% discount that Johnny T-Shirt offers to premium subscribers. Get your jerseys. Basketball season starts Monday. They got plenty of that NAL basketball stuff. Take care of them on East Franklin Street or online at johnnytshirt.com. They support us. They're part of the reason we can do all this stuff for you guys. So take care of them. We'll take care of y'all. National guys will pay the bills. We'll be back the day after Virginia edition. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. All right, boys, let's talk about the defense here on the Day After podcast. It's Jason Staples, Buck Sanders, Tommy Ashley, and I said Johnny T-Shirt earlier. Buck.
Do we have to?
Yeah, we got to. It is it's a thing. And Greg Barnes has thrown out some stats that says the defense, might look like it's doing better, but it's not really. One thing, Buck, that I saw early, and I thought Mac might blow an artery, is they came out. I don't know what it was, but they came out not ready to play against Virginia. Virginia has their 3 wide receivers out, which I don't think that's a huge deal unless one of them was named Josh Downs. But, Buck, your take overall on this defensive side of the ball, I mean, they did enough to win. They got some important stops, got a turnover that was relevant. We talked about Storm Duck. I think we got to start absolutely with Ced Gray, right?
Yeah, Gray has had a game yesterday, no question. And now he surged back into the lead in the ACC as with the most tackles. I think he passed Virginia's Nick Jackson in this game. And he has been a treasure. I mean, not one of North Carolina's most highly recruited guys, but a guy that has really played super well. He does everything right. Not only does he get the tackles that you're looking for, but he also makes big plays, comes up with big plays. So he's consistent and reliable and also a difference maker in the big play department. So what a find they got in Ced Gray when they picked him up. I think it was out of the Charlotte area, was he? I think maybe. Anyway, he's just playing his butt off for North Carolina. If they could get everybody else to play that way, they'd have a heck of a team.
Jason, what did you think about the defensive front? We talked on the game plan to force Virginia to run the ball. I didn't see much of at least in the first half. Now, that did change. And Gray talked about that, and I have a question about adjustments for you in just a second. But what did you think about how the defensive front was able to do? It felt like they were still trying to mix and match guys to make up for the losses that they had. What did you see?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think they had more trouble in this one, especially getting penetration and generating pressure than I thought they would coming in. I think you could definitely see where the losses of Taylor and Evans impacted them on the edge. And that's really where Virginia had a lot of their success, was on the edge in this game, especially running the quarterback on the edge. And I think that's something we have to consider in this, is a lot of what Virginia did in this game. I mean, they didn't just, line up and run it down Carolina's throat in terms of, line up and run the running backs. I mean, they did have, Hollins had 4.7 yards per carry on 16 carries. I mean, that's pretty good. And that's not what you want as a defensive front. But really where they had the most success was Brendan Armstrong, 5.3 yards per carry on 12 carries. I mean, he had 64 yards rushing. And a lot of that was, the read game, these sorts of things, and putting a lot of stress and pressure on the edge. And, the guys that Carolina's had on the edge who can set the edge against the run and have length and quickness going sideways, the two guys that they can put on the field that have the most of that were both gone in this game, and they're gone for the rest of the season. And I think you could see that more than anything. And when Virginia did have success running the football, it was mostly outside zone in terms of when they were running the football with their backs. And this is where, a really big defensive line, and Carolina's big inside, they made Carolina's defensive line have to go sideways and do so with really good gap integrity. And that's where some seams opened up. And so this is something that I think Carolina has significantly improved on the season. And you could still see some of that improvement in this game when teams run straight at them. I think their defensive line has gotten better there. I think they've handled things better in terms of triggering downhill. And you've seen the success in the last few weeks in short yardage situations where teams are coming straight downhill at you. They've had success there. Now they've got to get better handling that outside zone. And when they're asked to move laterally and do so with really good gap integrity, that's something that I think, if I were coaching against them next week, I'd run a ton of outside zone and some of the things off of that just based on what I saw in this game. And the thing is, Pitt ran a lot of outside zone too, and they did better on it. But that's something they're going to have to continue to go back and make sure that they polish up in terms of some of those big guys being able to maintain power and gap integrity against that kind of, quick flow to the outside so they don't allow cutbacks and all that.
Yeah, it was maddening. It was interesting. If folks haven't listened to Cedric Gray's post game, go listen to it. He talks about what they corrected there, and how they were able to get some success in the second half that slowed Virginia's rushing attack down a little bit. And shout out to the State fan that's in the YouTube chat. That is some dedication to be on the Inside Carolina podcast at 8:37 on Sunday morning after the team you pull for won a big game last night. But hey, we were all welcoming here. Buck, you mentioned Storm Duck earlier. Let's talk about him a little bit because I think he deserves it. I asked Chizik. Chizik said it was good for him. It's good for this defense to have a corner. That play where he was covering his guy and broke up somebody else's guy's pass.
That was elite. That's elite defensive back play there.
That was he's come around, and it's health and confidence. But what does he mean back there for this group? That like Jason said is trying to figure out the edges on the defensive front. Now you can get some coverage back there and maybe help out a little bit, because Sam Hartman, as bad as he looked in the last couple of weeks, he ain't gonna look that bad next week in Wake Forest. Well, what'd you think from the back end, Buck?
I thought North Carolina did a fairly adequate job in the back end overall, but Storm Duck's play was certainly a highlight of that defensive back play. He has really come on, and Mac Brown described it as he's finally trusting his ability to plant a foot and change direction and so on. He's able to trust that now, whereas earlier he's not. And we all know there's a mental aspect to injuries that even when you're physically able to do things, mentally sometimes you don't trust yourself to be able to do that. You're concerned you're going to re-injure yourself. So I think Duck has maybe crossed that hurdle, and it is he's got, by my count, and we'll talk about this at some point, 5 games left to play, counting the ACC championship game. They got to just win one more game and they're in. So out of the last 3, if he continues to progress the way he has the last 2 weeks over the course of this next 5 games, I think he is going to make himself some money at the next level. Somebody's going to give him a shot based on how he performs against the rest of the UNC schedule. So there's that to take in consideration.
Yeah, I mean, he's good for him. He stayed healthy. We banged on him a lot on these shows, and as has the fan base and everybody else. And he stepped up and made some plays. Uh, Clearly, Carolina's got to be better next week against Wake Forest on defense. Gene Chislett's got a week to figure it out. Like I said earlier, Wake has not looked good in the last 2 weeks, and they haven't looked good because of the getting pressure on Hartman. He just doesn't look like the same guy. But, Jason, let me ask you a question I was thinking about during the game, and it's happened now, I guess, 5 games in a row. Carolina's better in the second half on defense than they are in the first half. I understand adjustments. I understand how that works. But it seems like in the first half of these games, I mean, are teams doing something different than they've done all year? So Carolina hasn't really prepared. Said Gray mentioned Virginia went some tempo in the first half, and they weren't prepared for that. I mean, when you're preparing for a team, how difficult is it to get it right in the first half?
Well, it depends. So this is something that I talked about a few years ago, and some folks got kind of offended when I said after North Carolina should have beaten Clemson a few years ago, if you remember, and I commented that basically Clemson came into that game and ran their vanilla stuff. It's what they just ran what they ran, and it wasn't until the second half that they kind of went, "Oh wow, we gotta do some things here to take care of business." But they did not treat that as a big game. It was Clemson's standard game plan as opposed to their big game plan. And folks took that as insulting the Carolina program. But the thing is, and we talked about this for years on this podcast, coaches, there's only so much you can do. You only get these guys for 20 hours a week. And so you have to kind of, as much as coaches say, well, you treat everybody the same, you don't. And what you have to do is you have to figure out who the teams on your schedule are that you're going to circle and say, I'm going to bring a few extra wrinkles into this game. Make sure that I got a couple things ready to go. And one of the hardest things to handle as a coach is when you become the hunted, when you become the team that other teams circle on their schedule, and it's not just the rivalry games that are circling you, but everybody does, then you're having to face a different team every week than the team that you see on your schedule. So if you're Alabama gets everybody's best shot because that's a signature win for a coach that year. And so you're going to see teams come out with formation stuff, with concepts and all that they've had in their back pocket all year, and then they're going to break that out in the first 3 drives against Alabama. And Bama's going to be scrambling on the sideline to try to, adjust to whatever is there. And that makes it really hard if you're the hunted. The thing is, Carolina against the Virginia, I guarantee you circles the Carolina game. Right? This was a big game for Virginia. Virginia coming into the year, they're going to circle the North Carolina game, they're going to circle the Virginia Tech game, and those are the first two games they're going to circle on their schedule. So what they did is they came in and they showed some formation stuff I hadn't really seen from them, and they came in with some tempo stuff that they'd not done all year. I mean, I haven't watched everything that Virginia did, but they did stuff in the first half I had not seen them do. And in particular, what's interesting is they did some things offensively in terms of concepts that were similar to some of the things that gave Carolina trouble last year against them. Running some of the, bunch type stuff with some shorter tempo type throws for Armstrong to hit. Some of that stuff that gave Carolina trouble, and doing that off of tempo. And it took Carolina a little bit of time to get dialed in to go, okay, so this is what they're doing today. All right. And the thing is, once you figure that out, I mean, I remember being in the press box for the NC State Florida State game a few years back. This was 2014, and NC State went up on them by 2 or 3 scores in the first half. And my comment to the media member next to me was, okay, well, NC State's now out of their opening script. We'll see what happens now that we're playing real football the rest of the way. I'm betting this one comes back. And from that point forward, Florida State just absolutely put it on them because there was a better Florida State team than NC State. But NC State came in, and that was a kitchen sink game for them. They threw everything they had in those 3 drives, and they ran stuff that I hadn't seen NC State run in like 4 years. And then when it started getting to, you're having to run base football, well, the talent ended up doing all this. What I saw from Carolina yesterday was Carolina played a standard football game against Virginia. Virginia came in and threw what they had at Carolina. So Carolina came in as the hunted in this game. And that's the thing that I think makes this hard. So yeah, Virginia did stuff that they had not really shown this year. And that's what Carolina, next year, after what we've seen this year, if Carolina does finish out the year, let's imagine for the sake of argument that Carolina wins out in the regular season and then pulls an upset, which I'm not sure would be a huge upset at this point in the ACC championship game, goes 12-1 and goes to the college football playoff. I can guarantee you every team on Carolina's schedule next year is going to have that game circled. That means you're going to have to be doing extra work to see what wrinkles has this coach done when he's had these opportunities, when he's had a kitchen sink game over the last 5 years. And you're going to have to do extra prep during the offseason, during the week. And then you've got to make sure your guys are prepared to see that. That makes it hard. Like I said, I think Virginia came in and through those first 3 or 4 drives, they threw stuff at Carolina that they hadn't shown that much. And it took some time to get dialed in to adjust to that. And again, it's not as simple as like, oh, this is a new play. Like when you're playing defense, you have to respond quickly to what you're seeing. So it's a matter of like, oh, you got to adjust to, okay, so they're reading this guy. Now this guy has to play it this way. And then you start to make that adjustment. And then you can do it quickly once you've seen it a couple times. It's sort of like in baseball, you see a pitcher once through the order, see a pitcher the second time through the order, and then the third time through the order, guys start really getting their bat on the ball. And it's not just because the pitcher's getting tired, it's because you've just seen his stuff. And that's kind of what happens in these games. And Carolina made the adjustments on defense. And it's not just scheme adjustments, it's getting used to that from the player's perspective to be able to adjust and respond and react quickly.
Yeah, you brought it there, and that's a great point. Helps me understand it for sure. And I love the baseball references. I always love that stuff. That's why pro pitchers never throw complete games anymore because guys learn in a hurry. But let's wrap this one up. Spend the day after. Shout out to the almost 500 folks that have been here on the live version. Carolina and Wake Forest. It's a big game. Wake Forest has dropped 2 straight. I understand that. But North Carolina's 8-1. They can clinch the Coastal for good. Somebody asked, why has Clemson already clinched the Atlantic, but Carolina has not? It's because Clemson's beaten everybody that has a chance to tie them. Carolina hasn't done that yet. So you got to get one more. But what's your thoughts this week going or heading into Winston-Salem at 7:30 on Saturday night?
Well, if North Carolina ends up beating Wake Forest, it will ruin your perfect record in predicting ball games this year. Because at the beginning of the year, you picked Wake Forest to beat North Carolina, I think like everybody else did.
If I were a betting person, I would
Yeah.
care about that.
Yeah. I got you. And I would, my record, which is already ruined, would get worse if North Carolina were to beat Wake Forest, which I would rejoice about. But, this is going to be an interesting game in a lot of ways because it's sort of going to provide a preview of coming attractions, right? Because they're going to play NC State, who has a decent defense, an improving offense. NC State's gotten these days with the new kid Morris at quarterback, and so they've got Wake with a pretty good defense, State with a good defense, and if they get to Charlotte, which looks like now they're sure to do, they're going to play another really good defense in Clemson. So not only is this game important of itself because they can close it out and win the conference by beating Wake Forest, but it's also gives them the template for what's coming the rest of the year. Georgia Tech, that's a game they should win. They should have won it last year though, and look where we were. So, and I think we also need to give Jason's other team, Florida State, a little shout out for taking Miami out of the equation yesterday, and dropping them from any consideration that I doubt they would have managed anyway. They still got Clemson to go, I think. So North Carolina has positioned itself perfectly to close out this season. They just need to have the steel to do it over these next 3 games. That's my take.
Let's we're gonna wrap up this portion. But let's talk about the ACC in general. I'll freely admit, Jason, I didn't watch a second of Florida State Miami. I was watching baseball, Alabama, LSU. What else? State and Wake.
There's a lot of good programming on at the same time last night.
Know,
it was a good
really.
night for multiple screens.
This is when I need to be in Don Callahan's man cave with 4 different TVs. But is Cristobal on the hot seat in Miami? I mean, it's one thing to struggle in your first season. It's another thing to get blasted by your most hated rivalry.
At home.
At home. Well, you did call it Doak South. But the ACC in general, people talk about, Clemson and Wake and all these teams, and Notre Dame just ridiculous. Just Notre Dame owns the ACC. But Florida State, are they the best team in the conference? Unbiased, which I know you can't be.
Well, it depends on which Florida State. So the interesting thing is Florida State, the team that played last night is the same team personnel-wise that played against LSU. And it's really the first that they've been at that strength. They were down one of the running backs that played against LSU, but coming into the season, they had really 3 players on that defense that were indispensable. You just couldn't lose. You could argue for 4, but probably the most important player on that defense, you'd argue, was Fabian Lovett, their defensive tackle who sets the table for them on the inside and really makes them very different. And their backup defensive tackles are decent backups, but they're not. They're more vulnerable. Well, Lovett got hurt on the final drive against LSU and didn't play until getting some time against Georgia Tech last week. And one of the things that's really evident is they are completely different defensively with him on the field. And, that's a team that with him on the field, they shut LSU down pretty good. Without him, I think LSU probably wins that game by 2-3 scores. It's that big of a difference defensively. So the Florida State team that played Wake Forest, that actually outgained Wake Forest on a per-play basis by a healthy amount, they outgained actually Clemson on a per-play basis. They outgained NC State by a per-play basis. And they lost all 3 of those games, partly because those teams were able to run the football in key spots. And with Lovett on the field, they probably don't. And so I think with Lovett on the field, the 2 best teams in the ACC might right now be North Carolina and Florida State. If Florida State had Lovett all year, I think that would probably be the ACC championship matchup.
Here's the thing, that if I could jump in, Jason. On the year, their body of work, Florida State is number 1 in the ACC in offensive yards per play. On the year, their body of work, they're number 1 in the ACC in defensive points, yards per play. So they're number 1 in both categories in their entire body of work on the year. So if you were looking for, after what we saw yesterday, Notre Dame and Clemson, Florida State's got a really good argument for being overall, based on their entire body of work, the best team in the ACC. And, that's been a long road for Florida State to get back to where they are. And
yeah, the big issue for them is that they've not had the same. They've had some situational hiccups at different points that have really bitten them. They've blown some opportunities in the red zone that if they score on them, they win against NC State and Wake Forest. They lost a couple one-on-one matchups against Wake on third down, and a couple, gave up a couple touchdowns where guys in perfect position and, an NFL receiver just mossed him. That happens. And so they have been really good on a per play basis, but situationally, Clemson in the middle eight, as they call, and we've talked about that concept on this program before, where, the last 4 minutes of the first half, first 4 minutes of the second half, Clemson beat Florida State on the strength of, I think it was 20-3 in the middle eight. And then Florida State dominated the rest of that game. But it was a 7-minute stretch where Clemson scored almost their entire output. And that's been the issue for them. The other thing is that if you put Drake May on this Florida State team, that's probably a national championship team. If with Fabian Lovett healthy.
If he brought Downs with him.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they got some good receivers this year. But you put Drake May there, and that might be the national title favorite. If you pulled Florida State's defense with Lovett over and put him on the North Carolina team, that's probably the national title favorite. You've got some really good arguments to make on either side there. And the thing that May gives you is he gives you that wild card, or he gives you that trump card to stick on the table in those situations to say, oh, game's on the line. You need one play to win it. Well, here's the Drake May card. I'm going to play. All right, see ya.
Yeah,
and that's what they've lacked, and Carolina's had that.
Yeah, and the point of my question in the discussion here is Florida State. We're talking about them being possibly the best team in the ACC, and they're 6-3. Carolina, I don't think anybody would say that, except Jason. You're getting there, and they're 8-1, 5-0 in the conference.
Some of it's a difference in schedule. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
You look at the difference in schedule there, but the thing is, you can only play the teams on your schedule. And you have to win those situations. And, Carolina has not played well in all their games. I mean, they gave themselves some opportunities to lose games. And when it came down to it, they had the Drake May card to put on the table and go, nope, we're not going to lose this one.
Yep. And 8-1, 5-0, Buck. It's been a while since we've talked about that. I guess 2015, but Carolina's in a good spot going to Wake Forest. Somebody said put Drake May on Tennessee. Tennessee ain't winning anything with that defense.
Tennessee's not going to win it with Drake May.
And, one of the things we'll have to do, Tommy, on one of these podcasts is check off all the things that this team has accomplished under Mac Brown that they hadn't in the past in terms of road wins, in terms of one-score games, beating in Virginia and Charlottesville. I mean, he has defied. He has made Greg Barnes tear up his book of how things have gone in the past and relying on that. So we need to look at that at some point.
We can do that in December during when they're waiting for their bowl opponent or however that works out for sure. I'd love it. Tear up the book of expectations.
And one last thing, by the way, that whole discussion sort of highlights why it's so difficult to be a championship level team, because it's all about having sufficient depth to be able to absorb the attrition that's going to happen during the season. And if you lose a top player, like Florida State losing a key defensive tackle that changed them defensively, that may have cost them 3 losses. If you recruit just a little better and you have a defensive tackle behind him that's ready to go, then you don't get those 3 losses. That's the difference between, say, a Georgia and these other teams. That's where Carolina right now, they just lost 2 guys on the edge, and that changes their defense. The question is going to be, are they going to be able, they've recruited well enough on the defensive line, are they going to be able to take that step forward with the guys that are behind those guys to be able to absorb those different things. So I think that's another thing to think about why it's so hard to be a 1 or a 0 loss team, year in, year out.
Yep. Winning is hard. And I'm going to get us out of here because I see that our friends have shown up in the chat, and I'm not talking about the Georgia people.
Talking about Potter Stewart stuff.
I'm talking about I got it before you saw it, I think. Sunday morning porn bots. Life on the Edge on YouTube Live.
Oh, good point. Vohasek and Fox as well. I mean, they've had a ton of attrition on the defensive line that came up in the chat. It's really hard because guys get hurt in football. It's a physical game, and you've got to be able to absorb that, or you just got to get super lucky and not lose guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And winning is hard. And right now, Buck, I'll let you end it with what you said you were going to end it with.
8-1.
Hey, they made me
8-1.
money. 9 games into the year, I've already won my bet with Bud Elliott on this. Remember, it was the 7.5 wins, and I took the over.
And-
I'll take it.
And people that took the over on the win shares for North Carolina, they can start,
Cash in your
fattening their
tickets.
wallet up a little bit, making
Yep.
plans for a Bahamas trip or something.
Yep.
There are no pictures on the scorecard. Carolina 8-1, 5-0 in the ACC. Going to Wake Forest for opportunity to clinch the Coastal. 3 games left in the regular season. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples, it's always a pleasure, my friends. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, but also to the close to 5 bills of people that have been in here on a Sunday morning. We will be back all week at Inside Carolina with podcast content, YouTube content, and, of course, everything on the site and message boards. Thanks, guys.